So you could bet as of today?
Yeah. Probably won't.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Stokastic NBA Strategy Show. We got a big NBA slate, 12 games and a whole bunch of players on the injury report, just pretty much status quo for this time of the year as far as it goes to the NBA. While you guys come in, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And by the way, a new deal we've got Black Friday coming up this week. And as a result of that, we have the best offer we've ever had on a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership. Because for right now, you can get it for 1 week for $5. That is 90% off the normal package. All you have to do is sign up using the promo code THANKS when you're checking out, or just click on the link. It's going to be thrown into the YouTube chat right now. It's below in the comment section. You click on that link, you're going to get 1 week, $5, and see all the tools we have behind the paywall. Our lineup generator, player projections, ownership projections, everything that you guys are going to need to build winning NBA DFS lineups and lineups that are going to win for pretty much every single sport out there. $5 you're going to get them for. So wanted to make sure I highlight that to start the show because it's really important. But Adam, what's going on? How are you feeling about today?
Pretty good because it's not yesterday, and yesterday was just absolutely awful. So ready for today.
Yeah, it was. So we were talking about it a little beforehand, and some of it's going to carry over to today as well because we got all the same guys out for the Philadelphia 76ers. I loved Montrezl Harrell yesterday. He ended up being my most rostered player. Given what his ownership was, I still kind of felt good about it, but we're going to get more into it in a little bit. But I mean, what did you take away from the way Philly ran their lineups yesterday?
So my main takeaway there was that it went as expected in that they actually played like straight 48 minutes of centers. Obviously the split wasn't what you would project with Reed getting 31, 32, Harrell playing like 15 or 16. But the big takeaway was that there's going to be a lot of volatility in these minutes. Whichever guy's playing well is likely to get more minutes. So, and I was with you. I had a ton of Harrell as well. Didn't have a lot of Reed. I understood like why Reed would be a good play. And I don't fault anyone for playing him if they played him instead of Harrell. My bigger takeaway though was that like, as long as you were heavy on one of those centers, I think, played it as well as you could. If you didn't play either one, I feel like you made a mistake because like if you projected them to play close to 48 minutes combined, as cheap as they were and as good as they are point per minute, it's really hard to see how like you wouldn't be getting to one of them. So to me, like if you were on the Harrell side, like you and me were, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like you certainly shouldn't have been, you're lying to yourself if somebody's going to be like, oh, I knew Paul Reed was going to play 30 minutes. Like, no, you didn't. Like, you're just wrong. So like, there's nothing wrong with being heavy on Harrell there. I think you should have been heavy on at least one of the centers.
Yeah, and I tell you, I felt great about it 3 minutes into the game when I had like 6 points and 5 rebounds. I didn't realize he was going to have all of his production 3 minutes into the game. But we go on to today and some similar situations to talk about, but some new ones as well. The first game of the slate is the Minnesota Timberwolves against the Indiana Pacers. The Timberwolves finally starting to play a little bit better as of late, but on a slate with 12 games, just another situation that you and I have talked about a lot as of late. Individually, some of these guys are going to look good. They're going to have upside, whether it's Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. It is just going to be hard to prioritize a lot of these guys on a 12-game slate as more value opens up. Because as long as everybody is healthy for the Timberwolves, it's hard to know where the production is coming from on any one given night. But do you have a priority play of the stars from Minnesota?
No, I just think across the board, they look pretty solid. It's the same situation we've had for the last couple of games with them where prices have come down a bit. Gobert is sitting at 6,500, Russell sitting at 6K, Towns at 9K on DraftKings, Edwards 8K with shooting guard, small forward eligibility. They all look relatively good. They don't stand out on a 12-game slate where, you have Philadelphia missing a bunch of players. You have plenty of other teams that are going to be shorthanded. So as long as all four of those guys are in, they're never really going to be true priorities. But at the same time, Gobert averaging around 32 minutes per game, around 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. He's a little bit underpriced. Towns is certainly in a good spot. We know, Edwards is capable of having massive games as well. So I like all four guys, but I wouldn't say that there's one that stands out as, a clear top priority.
Yeah, same with me individually. Like I said, some of these guys could have upside. And then also by the time that we get more injury news that comes out as players get ruled out, because there are so many players that are questionable on the injury report, I'm sure that some of these guys, even now that I'm getting to in my initial run of, like 7-8% or so, even that could end up falling by the wayside. We got a couple players on the injury report and Kyle Anderson and Jordan McLaughlin, but would that change anything really for you on this slate?
No, not too much. Like if they're out, particularly Kyle Anderson, we should see more Nas Reed, who's 3,500. I mean, if you want to really try and get lucky, then go for it. But it's a 12 gamer. Last game we did see like 30 minutes from Torian Prince without Kyle Anderson. But again, that's something that doesn't necessarily need to happen. And on a 12 gamer, I'm probably not gonna mess around and try and catch 30 minutes from Torian Prince. If McLaughlin's out, I think maybe you get a little bit more playing time from Russell. He has pretty much been his straight backup, and you're typically getting around 30 minutes from Russell. Maybe if he's out, you get a few more.
On the other side of the game, we have the Indiana Pacers, and I think a lot of people know where I stand with Tyrese Halliburton at this point of the year. He's pretty frequently been one of my favorite pay up options. The price, it's slowly starting to creep up. My expectation for the years, I said I did think Halliburton was going to end up being a 10K player by the end of the year. We're getting close to it, and I still think there's a little bit of upside in him at this salary. A lot different though, playing him at a mid 9K price range as opposed to when he was in the mid 8K range a few weeks ago. Still, I think that there is some upside in playing Halliburton around 10% owned. I think that's about appropriate, probably where I'm going to be with him. What do you make of Halliburton as a pay up option?
I think he looks good. I think he's at a price point where there's a lot of guys that look similar as well. But 1.38 DraftKings points per minute this year, about 34 minutes per game over his last 10. Certainly a strong option. I don't think he's overpriced here. Happy to get to him. Expect that I'll be in that, like 10 to 15% range.
And then as far as the injuries go, and it seems like, yeah, pretty much the same page you and I with Halliburton. With injuries here, Isaiah Jackson is questionable. And the front court minutes between Isaiah Jackson and guys like Jalen Smith, Miles Turner. Miles Turner obviously is the most secure minutes, but we do see minutes get yanked around for a lot of these Indiana guys where sometimes Jalen Smith plays big minutes, sometimes Isaiah Jackson plays bigger minutes. If Isaiah Jackson is out, what would that mean for potential playing time of Miles Turner and Jalen Smith in the front court?
It would make me like Miles Turner a lot more because we've basically been getting Isaiah Jackson just as the straight backup to Miles Turner. Jackson plays pretty much every minute that Turner's not on the floor. And we've seen it a lot this year. Frequently when that backup is out, it goes overlooked a little bit in DFS, but you can usually project a couple of extra minutes onto that starter and feel pretty good about it. So, whereas Miles Turner averages around 29 minutes per game, I think you could go to 31, 32 if Jackson's out. There's just an increased likelihood that Turner plays a lot of minutes. We haven't seen Jalen Smith getting center minutes. I think it's likely that you would get like Terry Taylor thrown in there or Goga Batadze thrown in there, but I think that there's a very good chance if Isaiah Jackson's out, Miles Turner would play more. As far as Jalen Smith goes, he's just a total question mark. I mean, he's one of the most volatile players in DFS right now. You start to feel good about his playing time. You start to feel good about his production. And then you get a game like last time where he opens the game, he opens the second half, and he never comes back in either half, plays like 18 minutes. We've seen that happen a couple of times recently. But still, over his last 10 games, he's averaging a little bit above 24 minutes per game. He's about a fantasy point per minute guy. And we do have a matchup here against a big Minnesota front court where I think it's a little bit less likely that they go with the rotation they did last game where you had TJ McConnell play a lot of minutes. Now, part of that was garbage time, but like TJ McConnell closed the first half playing alongside Halliburton. You had Hield, Naismith, and Turner out there as well. That's a little bit more difficult to do, I think, against the Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert front court. It makes me think it's more likely that you get Jalen Smith out there. The flip side too is Jalen Smith's more likely to be in foul trouble dealing with this front court, but that's a separate issue. Assuming he can avoid foul trouble, I think you're more likely to see the bigger front court from Indiana as opposed to what we saw against Orlando. Because keep in mind, in the Orlando game, Wendell Carter Jr. was out. So, you had Bol, you had Mo Bamba out there, but that's a bit different than Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns.
Even just the last three games, it really shows the volatility of Jalen Smith. Last time out, you mentioned the minutes. Game was a blowout. The rotations were all weird. He only plays 18 minutes, scores 14 fantasy points. The game before, 25 minutes, 20 fantasy points. And the game before that, 30 minutes and 47 fantasy points. It's kind of perfect for tournaments just because he's not priced for his floor or ceiling. He's just kind of priced in between. So a lot of times he's either falling well short of salary expectations or far exceeding them. So particularly if Isaiah Jackson's out and we think this is a spot where the Pacers would probably be just forced to play bigger lineups, I think that could also help solidify some of the minutes of Jalen Smith. So to me, Jalen Smith, I think this is a spot where, at least in tournaments, he looks pretty decent. And then I agree with you also on Miles Turner. His minutes could be really substantial if there is no Isaiah Jackson today. Anything else you want to talk about from the Pacers?
Buddy Hield you kind of know what you're getting. $6,300 price tag, averaging about 33 minutes per game over the last 10. He's about a fantasy point per minute guy, shooting guard, small forward. He's going to look decent. Um, yeah, so I think Halliburton obviously looks good. Hield looks decent. I like Jalen Smith. I also like that he's only getting 12% ownership. This guy is so scary when he's 35% owned, and it's just like, all right, I'm playing like you said, he's either going to smash his price tag or he's going to miserably fail, and I don't even really get a huge benefit if he smashes because 1/3 of the field is there. So that's not the case today, which is nice. And then again, yeah, if Jackson's out, I like Miles Turner more.
Next game here is the Portland Trailblazers against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And by the way, I can't remember if I asked for likes and subs at the start of the show, but if you guys didn't do it yet, do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Now for the Portland Trailblazers, Damian Lillard remains out for this team. Maybe came back too soon from that calf injury because when it first happened, he thought it was no big deal. He was like, I would still be playing through it if this was a playoff game. I don't even need to miss time. We're just being cautious. But then he comes back, he plays a few games, almost immediately re-injures the calf, and now looks like Dame is going to be out for a little bit of an extended period of time. In his absence, who stands out the most for Portland that we have not yet seen a price increase on?
So, I mean, we have seen the prices increase at least a bit. There are still ceilings on these guys, but I think they're pretty much correctly priced in terms of median projection. Anthony Simon's still really good. He's averaging about 1.15 DraftKings points per minute without Lillard. He's likely to give you 35, 36 minutes. He's 7,600. I think that's around where he should be. Nurkic sees increased production without Lillard out there. You also can see a bit more playing time from him. Played 31.6 minutes last game. And the reason that Lillard's absence is important for Nurkic is when this team's at full strength, they really like going with Justice Winslow over Nurkic in their closing lineup. When they're not at full strength, Winslow is more likely to replace Shadon Sharp in the closing lineup, which is what we saw last game. So you got a Simons, Winslow, Hart, Grant, Nurkic lineup. Whereas if Lillard's in there, the Nurkic piece is becoming Lillard, even though they play different positions. So I think Lillard being out is a bump for Nurkic, both in production and in playing time. Makes him look like actually my favorite option from the Blazers.
Yeah, and I think something else we should consider also a matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So before we're talking about maybe we could feel better about Jalen Smith's minutes just because Minnesota's so big. I think kind of the same for Nurkic. I don't know that Portland's going to want to play small lineups against Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. So Nurkic's minutes, who have been all over the place as well. Like it's kind of been similar to Jalen Smith, just he's a significantly better player and fantasy producer than Jalen Smith. But this might be one of those spots where we could feel good about Nurkic's minutes. And he's cheaper than we've seen him be in the past. The points per minute production is still there. Just the minutes aren't always there on a consistent basis. So I could get behind that. I think Nurkic is probably the player here that has the most upside relative to his salary. Shaden Sharp was starting last game in place of Lillard. Is he somebody like as a value play, or does anything else stand out from Portland?
I mean, he's only 3,500 on DraftKings. If he starts again, it's not like that can be that big of a mistake. He hasn't been a great fantasy option and does still have to share the ball with Simons and Nurkic and Grant. It's not like and Hart, it's not like he's going to be the primary anything when he's out there, but he is cheap enough. If he starts, you can take some shots at him. Played 27 minutes, basically 26 without garbage time last game. Wasn't in the closing lineup, like I said. If he plays well, maybe he does, get in there instead of Winslow, even though I doubt it. So you're probably looking at around 26 minutes of a guy that isn't a very good fantasy producer, but he's also really cheap. So just sort of a tournament flyer if you want to.
Yeah, and one thing I was going to add to that is I get to a little bit of Shaden Sharp in just the initial builds that I ran, but with that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if he's somebody that just falls by the wayside later on the day
Right.
as more injuries come out and more value opens up. And one of those pieces could potentially be on the other side of this game with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Karis LeVert has already been ruled out, and Kevin Love is questionable. I'm kind of surprised Kevin Love is trying to play through. He's got a fractured thumb, and at least he's trying to push through it. But if he is not able to play, in addition to Karis LeVert being out, is this opening up any kind of value for Cleveland?
I think so, because we've seen Chetty Osman play a bit more when Kevin Love is out. We had seen 33 minutes a couple games ago. We saw 29 last game. And then now if you're going to take or LeVert was out. LeVert was out last game too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
LeVert, LeVert has a sprained ankle, and he missed last game and only played 14 minutes the game before.
Yeah, so last game you got 29 minutes from Chetty. Lamar Stevens started, played about 29 minutes as well. Chetty was in the closing lineup over him alongside Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, and Allen. I think that's probably a hot hand situation, but you're going to see Chetty out there plenty. 3,800 for Chetty is going to look like a pretty decent price tag. Not a bad point per minute guy. Lamar Stevens, I think a little bit more difficult to get to at 3,900, just not quite as good a point per minute guy and going to be playing more minutes alongside the starters. But especially if Love is out, I think it opens up some value there.
And as far as the pay up options go, I know Garland and Mitchell have individually both had some really big games as the season's gone on. Even with them playing together, we've seen some of the individual upside. Mitchell had 52 fantasy points last game. He was terrible the game before. Garland, there's a lot of this where it seems unlikely to me that we will see games where Garland and Mitchell both go off at the same time just because there's so much overlap. But something else too about them playing together and how they do kind of cut into each other's production, there's just other guys in this price range that I think I'm going to prefer today. I didn't really get too much of either of them while I was running lineups this morning. Do you want to try to talk me into Mitchell or Garland in any significant way? Or like me, do you like other pay up options better?
Both. I like other pay up options. I do really like the playing time you get from these guys, though. That's the big thing for me. Darius Garland, in the 10 games he's played with Mitchell this year, he's averaging 1.11 DraftKings points per minute and 35 minutes per game. But in competitive games, like keep in mind that includes the first game of the year where he got hurt 6 minutes in, and he's still averaging 35 minutes. In competitive games, he's typically giving you 37, 38 minutes. So that's really appealing. And then Mitchell, you're still seeing him play a really big role even with Darius Garland, and he's playing around 38 minutes per game as well. So I do like the playing time. That's kind of like the thing that equals everything out for me because, for example, we've already talked about Tyrese Halliburton at this price tag. Halliburton's a better point per minute fantasy guy than both Mitchell and Garland when both of those guys are active, but Halliburton's averaging around 34 minutes per game, Mitchell's at around 38, and Mitchell averages around 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. So it kind of just evens out to where I think the Cleveland guys look pretty good as well.
Yeah, I think other guys, like I said, Halliburton, I'll probably be getting to more, maybe like SGA, but we'll see what this slate looks like a little bit later on the day when we do deep dive and live before lock and more injury news comes out. One team that we know for sure is going to be shorthanded, the Philadelphia 76ers, just decimated by injuries right now. Joel Embiid is out, Tyrese Maxey's out, James Harden is out. At the top of the show, you and I talked about the center dynamic, and I want to know how you feel about it coming into today because after the results of last night, Paul Reed is currently projected to be the most popular player on the slate. He's projected for 35% ownership over on DK. Well, on the flip side, Montrezl Harrell projected for less than 1% ownership over on FanDuel. Paul Reed right now is projected for 7% ownership. Totally different scenario, though, because Paul Reed and Montrezl Harrell actually been priced up a little bit on FanDuel. Although Harrell's still $4,900 on FanDuel projected for less than 1% ownership. If Paul Reed is going to be chalk today, I like getting to Montrezl Harrell as a pivot play. Is that crazy or could you get on board with that?
I can get on board. The caveat here is assuming Harrell starts. If Paul Reed starts, there's still a lot of volatility here, but it would, to me, signal that they are just looking to lean on Paul Reed at this point after, how good he looked yesterday and all of that. If they go back to Harrell, though, I think this is the exact same situation as yesterday, where you expect them to play close to 48 minutes. Maybe they close in a competitive game with PJ Tucker at the 5 and you get like 44 combined minutes from Harrell and Reed. But it would just be a situation where, if Harrell starts, I'm probably going to project like 20. So yesterday I went 25 or 26 on Harrell and like 18 or 19 on Reed. Today I think I'd go like 23, 21 in favor of Harrell if he's starting. But if that ownership's going to play out like that, I just think these are such similar plays that I would play a lot of Harrell if he's starting.
And something else to consider as well is I think a lot of this is going to be decided by game script, who plays better. And the reality is Paul Reed just was really good last night when he got on the court. It was a big reason that we saw the Nets lose to the 76ers. This is also a really good matchup for both Harrell and Reed. The Charlotte Hornets have a miserable defensive front court. If Harrell gets off to a really good start and just plays really well, he might just stay on the court, which is what looked like was going to happen towards the beginning of last game. And then he was just kind of terrible in the second half, got subbed out fairly early. If he's going to start well against the Charlotte Hornets front court, which I think is fairly likely, decent possibility, centers have crushed this team all year, Harrell might just play more of the minutes and could just be really good because he is still a good points per minute fantasy producer. I like Harrell. Harrell right now is my favorite tournament play on the slate relative to current ownership.
Yeah, if he starts and somehow this ownership stays that low, I love Harrell. The other thing too is, not that Mason Plumlee is like a super good opposing center. And not that Montrezl Harrell is good defensively, but you were essentially playing against a Brooklyn team that doesn't have a center yesterday. Like Claxton didn't play a ton. He's not a big dude anyway. Ben Simmons, their other center. Here you at least have a center on the other side where, maybe there's a little bit greater chance that they prefer going with Harrell there over Reed.
Yeah, so we'll see what ends up happening, but that's definitely my expectation. By the way, somebody in chat, everyone hates Crit says Philly's playing Charlotte. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. I don't think that we've made any mistakes with that so far, unless I misspoke at some point. They played the Nets yesterday. Maybe that was something that got lost in translation. But yeah, playing the Hornets today, great matchup. Now, as for the other guys, Shake Milton, Tobias Harris, DeAnthony Melton, their prices have come up, which I think just had to be the case considering all the injuries for Philly. Is there any meat left on the bone in these guys' salaries?
Some. I mean, 7,600 for Melton, 5,500 for Milton, I think still looks good. Milton played 36 minutes yesterday. Melton played around 34. You're still going to get a lot of usage for these guys without Joel Embiid. Tobias Harris said he's going to play today as well. He's 7,800. Started out really poorly yesterday. Came back after rolling his ankle, I think it was, and played well for the rest of the game. There's certainly plenty of upside for all of these guys still. There's just so much usage to go around without Embiid or Maxey on the floor or Harden.
Yeah, we've seen. I would like to say Tobias Harris is my favorite. He is $8,400 on FanDuel, $7,800 on DraftKings. And like you said, he did briefly leave the game with a turned ankle. But if you were to ask me just which player do I think should lead the Philadelphia 76ers in usage, 31% usage yesterday for Tobias Harris, lost those few minutes to the ankle turn. I'm going to call him my favorite of the quote unquote pay up options from Philly. Is that reasonable to you, or is there a different one that you would be prioritizing?
Which one did you say was your favorite?
Tobias Harris.
So are you just saying out of Melton and Harris?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. I think it's close. I probably lean Melton.
Yeah, I think to me, I have them projected really similarly initially, and Harris is projected for about half the ownership, which has me leaning towards him a little bit. But either way, for the 76ers, I think that despite the price upticks on some of these players, I'm on the same page as you. I still think there's reason to get to them. Still a little bit of meat on the bone, even with the salaries coming up. Now, on the other side for Charlotte, LaMelo Ball remains out, and the matchup probably easier than it would appear to be on paper just because of all of the injuries on the 76ers side of the game. Does anything stand out to you from Charlotte?
Not really. You have Gordon Hayward back, as of a couple of games ago, so he's going to cut into production a little bit. And price tags have come up too. So you have Terry Rozier at 8K. He's playing a ton of minutes. That looks fine. Hayward at 6,300 coming off of a game where he played like 37 minutes. So we know you're not dealing with any sort of restrictions there. Looks okay. But with it being a 12-game slate, I think this is just a tough team to get to. PJ Washington's been playing more minutes. He's averaging 34 minutes per game over his last 10. Mason Plumlee's averaging about 29 to 30 minutes per game over his last 10. But prices have sort of just corrected. I do think it's a good matchup for Plumlee. Like, you're going up against a Montrezl Harrell / Paul Reed frontcourt. Should be a good time for him. But center on a 12-game slate, you're not really going to ever hear me say Mason Plumlee's a priority unless he's like 4,400 or something.
Yeah, so Mason Plumlee, another guy who we've seen some individual upside games from him. And there is definitely opportunity where Montrezl Harrell is a terrible defensive center. One thing that I think is really hard to project for, and I don't know how much you incorporate this, but typically we would look at the Philadelphia 76ers and, center going against them. It's not the easiest matchup in the world. Going from Joel Embiid to Paul Reed and Montrezl Harrell, it does make for a much easier matchup for Mason Plumlee that's kind of hard to project for.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically there's no defense. There's no interior defense now. Normally there is, now there's not.
Yeah, so I could get behind that for sure. Anything else you want to talk about from Charlotte?
No.
All right, the next game, the Sacramento Kings against the Atlanta Hawks. Off the top of my head, is 240.5 the highest total you've seen all year? This is absurdly high.
It's got to be up there.
What's that?
It's got to be up there.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember. I mean, there's been some Sacramento games that were like 238, 237. I can't remember 240.5. Two teams that play at a fast pace, a lot of really good offense in this game. The Kings, I believe, are second now in adjusted offensive efficiency. De'Aaron Fox has just been insane lately. In that game last night against the Grizzlies, he was hitting 3-pointers that he had no business making, let alone taking. He was taking just crazy contested fadeaway threes, was knocking down everything. Really high total in this game. Sabonis, Fox, or either of them pay up options that you're going to be wanting to get to.
I mean, you can throw Fox right into that category with Tyrese Halliburton and the two guards on Cleveland because, like you said, like he's always been a good fantasy producer, but we've seen him take a step forward this year. He's $9,400. He's likely to give you around 35 minutes or so. He's averaging 1.35 DraftKings points per minute this year, 29.8% usage rate to go along with a 30.7% assist percentage, 64% true shooting on his 29.8% usage rate is excellent. He just looks really good. I have a hard time like differentiating him from Halliburton, Mitchell, Garland. Ownership will play a big role for me there, but I like De'Aaron Fox. I think that this price tag is still where it should be. He's averaging about the same fantasy points per minute this year as Halliburton.
Yeah, and also somebody else. I mean, I think both Fox and Sabonis are getting slept on. We've got both these guys projected for 1% ownership. Sabonis too at 9,600. He's triple double upside. The one thing that makes it hard to project for him is the minutes. He played 37 last night. He gets in foul trouble all the time.
Yeah.
But I do think he's a guy who, if he is able to avoid foul trouble, and this should be a matchup where it's not like he's guarding a center who's capable of creating a lot of offense. Going up against Clint Capella, I'm hopeful this is a spot where he could avoid fouls. Sabonis, too, less than 1% projected ownership. Not that he'd be my favorite pay up option, but I assume I'll be well over the 0.6% projected ownership mark.
Yeah, and he's a really good example of somebody where like their average playing time doesn't really tell the whole story because like you said, he fouls a lot. And you have to include that. You can't just go into every game saying, "Oh, I'm projecting Domantas Sabonis to play 37 minutes" because he does foul. He likes to foul. He's going to keep doing it. But in the games where he's not in foul trouble, he's playing 35 to 37 minutes. This isn't somebody where it's just like, he's not one of those centers where he's got like a legitimate backup center playing 16, 17 minutes, and you just can't ever expect him to play more than 31 or 32. If he doesn't foul, he's playing 35 plus, and he's a very, very good point per minute guy. 1.34 DraftKings points per minute, basically the same as De'Aaron Fox, basically the same as Tyrese Halliburton. And like you said, you do have a low usage front court for Atlanta with Clint Capella and John Collins, neither one high usage guys. Hopefully Sabonis doesn't just start hacking Trae Young on drives or anything. But I think on DraftKings, he is center only at 9,600. So the opportunity cost is a little bit higher for him than it is for the guards that produce the same, like Fox and Halliburton. But I'm with you. I think he should be getting more than no ownership.
Yeah, and then same for FanDuel. Not only is he getting no ownership, but he's power forward and center eligibility on FanDuel. So more roster spots to play him in. I think he's a good pay up to be contrarian option in large field tournaments. Do any of the role players stand out to you from the Kings?
Just as guys you can kind of mix in. If you want to play the narrative of guys I played yesterday that sucked and will probably go off, you should be playing a lot of Keegan Murray. He got in early foul trouble. He played 24 minutes. He also sucks. He's 4,700. If he plays well, he's probably playing like low to mid 30s. I don't think he's anywhere near as useful on this slate as he was on the 4-gamer yesterday. Harrison Barnes at 5,300 is kind of interesting. You've seen his playing time come back up a bit. Played 33 minutes yesterday. They've sort of condensed this rotation. We did get Terrence Davis back for a little bit yesterday, but that was mostly due to Keegan Murray's first half foul trouble. So that's really another game where you haven't seen Davis play a big part in that rotation, and that is good overall for Barnes, Murray, and Herter.
And then the other side of the game, I have somebody who I've been curious to get your opinion on ever since I ran some lineups this morning, because a couple weeks ago, you and I were talking about John Collins, and we said there's going to be a point where his price gets so cheap that there's going to be reason to start considering him in tournaments where, when we were looking at him at like $6,200, $6,300, just all his numbers are down across the board. The playing time has been down, the usage has been down, the rebound rate has been down, the assists haven't been there. And I think we could attribute that almost entirely to the addition of DeJounte Murray. But we've seen an uptick in playing time for John Collins as of late. The last few games, 34 minutes, 34, 32, 33, 34. If he is going to be on the court for that many minutes in this game that's supposed to have a total that's just crazy high, 240 and a half. I know we have DeAndre Hunter back in the mix, but Collins' playing time was on the rise even the last time we saw Hunter playing. Do you buy into the playing time for John Collins? And is there upside if he's going to be on the court that much in such a high-paced game?
Yeah, I mean, I at least sort of buy into it because he's somebody that should be out there a lot. Like, he's a good player. He also should be shooting more, but he's not. And also, for anybody that's going to say 2 games ago was overtime, it was, but he fouled out long before overtime. So he played 34 minutes regardless. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, he's averaging around 31, 32 minutes per game overall, but we have seen that playing time trend up a bit. Just based on Atlanta beat writers, there's been, kind of some tweets about Jalen Johnson sort of still needing to learn and maybe shouldn't be taking as many minutes from Collins as he has been earlier in the year. So I think there's a path to 34. I'll probably project 32 or 33 here, which at 5,600 in a game that's likely to have as many possessions as this one is still going to make him look like an interesting option. He is getting about 10% ownership. I think that's probably around where he should be.
Yeah, and then as something else that's kind of weird is i- he's not the only one who's been struggling in this new team. So DeJounte Murray, at least at the start of the year, it looked like there wasn't going to be too much of a drop off in fantasy production for Murray or Trae Young. That has not been the case lately for Murray, who, despite getting all the minutes, the usage has come down a little bit, the assist rate has come down. He is actually not topped 40 fantasy points now since, let's see, November 12th. So it's been about 2 weeks since we saw a game of over 40 fantasy points for DeJounte Murray. It's clearly a good matchup, but what do you make of the dynamic between Young and Murray? And what are you going to do with them in tournaments tonight?
It's been really difficult for me to roster him this year. Um, the issue and like right now he's getting 14% ownership, and I get it. You have a really high ceiling on Dejounte Murray. Overall this year, he's still at 1.18 DraftKings points per minute. He's giving you 37, 38 minutes. So he's another one in this price range where he's not as good a point per minute guy as your Tyrese Halliburtons or De'Aaron Foxes or Trae Youngs, but he is playing a lot of minutes. The issue for me really though is just that he's pulling the ownership here. Like, why is DeJounte Murray ever getting 14 times as much ownership as De'Aaron Fox? Why is he getting double the ownership of Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland? And especially here, I mean, you can't even like fall on the crutch of, well, Garland plays with Mitchell and Mitchell plays with Garland, so I'm going to play Murray. Like he plays with Trae Young. It's the same thing. So I don't know. I don't get it. I get the game has a higher total, so like he's going to project a bit hot, a little bit better than he otherwise would. But it's a spot where if we get the lock and Donovan Mitchell's 10 to 15%, and so is Halliburton, and so is Garland, and Murray's sitting at 5, then okay, maybe I start getting into some DeJounte Murray. But if he's going to be one of the highest owned guys of that group, I'm going to just play the guys that get more fantasy points.
And Trae Young's also quite popular on this slate. We've got Trae Young projected for 22% ownership on DK. Trae Young on FanDuel is projected for also 22% ownership. $9,900 price tag there. So just below 10K on both FanDuel and DK, while being one of the most popular pay up options on the slate. Number one, do you agree with the ownership? And then where would you stand on him as a cash game option as well?
Yeah, I do agree on the ownership. I think that overall this year he's comparable to guys like Fox and the other guards that we've talked about. But this game just should have so many possessions. So I will say I don't think there should be this level of an ownership gap between De'Aaron Fox and Trae Young. You're talking about the same game, same fantasy points per minute, very similar playing time. One of them getting 21% ownership at $400 more, one of them getting 1% at $400 less. Not really sure how that works out. Maybe it changes, maybe it doesn't. Fox obviously on the back-to-back, but not that big of a deal. So I think between Young and Fox, there's a gap, but like, I do agree that Young probably should be getting more ownership than guys like Halliburton. They're just in games with totals that are 20 points lower or whatever it may be. So you're just talking less possessions, less opportunities, and I would think Young is on the short list of cash options as well.
So let's move on to the next game, the Dallas Mavericks against the Boston Celtics. Now, I have not played a whole lot of Luka Doncic or Giannis lately just because they've become so much more expensive than all of the other pay up options. We do have a little bit of a different dynamic today because Spencer Dinwiddie is questionable. But even if he's out, I just think it's going to be hard for me to pay all the way up to Luka when we have so many high upside options that are $2,000-$3,000 less expensive for him. It just becomes difficult to jam him in when I'm building lineups, especially in an optimizer and fantasy cruncher. Just other players end up being in higher projected lineups. What do you make of the price point on Luka today? And will Spencer Dinwiddie being out affect how much you would get to Luka in a significant way?
I think one way or the other, it's just gonna be difficult for me to get there unless a bunch of like somehow $3,500 value opens up. And even then, you're going to still run into the same issue where you just have this like really large group of 9 to 10K guards that collectively, it's pretty likely one or two of them are going for, 60, 65 DraftKings points. And so you're going to need Luka to go out there and go for 75, 80. And certainly he can. But, I've said it a lot since DraftKings changed up their top end pricing. It's just, it used to be that these guys like Luka, if they hit their median projection, they were very likely to be in the winning lineup. And that's why they were such a priority to get to. Now, if they hit their median projection, they're not likely to be there, just like most other players aren't likely to be there if they hit their projection. Alex, I know, has talked about it a lot on shows where, you're to build a winning lineup, you need to actually be wrong on like all of your projections. You need them all to be like a standard deviation plus north of where you projected them. And now that the pricing is correct on these upper tier guys, it's the same thing with Luka. He's going to project as one of the highest scorers on the slate, but you still need him to beat that by like a standard deviation. And so he's not really any different than these other guys that are cheaper. The difference ends up being that when you get to Luka, you have $3,000 or $2,000 less to spend elsewhere. So you're going to end up getting like a much weaker guy as that second piece. Whereas if you go to like the Trae Young, the Aaron Fox, whoever you prefer in that range, you're just going to be able to get to better pieces elsewhere in your lineup. So it ends up just being really tough for me to want to get there.
Yeah, and to your point about the pricing change, the first slate of the year, Luka was $9,800. The second slate, he was 10.2, then he was 10.7, and it gradually got up to the point now where he's just really expensive and other guys end up projecting better. The only other thing I think to talk about here is if Dinwiddie is out, are there any value plays you really want to get to?
Probably not. I mean, Tim Hardaway Jr. probably plays more at 4,300. You probably get more from like a $3,500 Josh Green, but it's not like he does a lot when he's on the floor. Same goes for, Reggie Bullock, Dorian Finney-Smith. Like Finney-Smith's really cheap. I guess if you need a cheap value option, I don't mind going there, but Luka's just going to do so much of the offensive work here that I don't know that anything ends up looking like a priority.
And then potential value on the other side of the game. Jason Tatum is questionable for the Celtics today. Now, if he's out, I think we have to assume that a whole bunch of usage is going to go towards Jaylen Brown, and he'd become another one of those, pay up options who isn't crazy expensive that I think we'd have to prioritize. But if there's no Jason Tatum, what would that do for Jaylen Brown for you, and who else would stand out from the Celtics?
Yeah, I mean, it would make everybody just look better because you're taking so much usage out of the lineup with Tatum. It is an unappealing matchup against Dallas just because of how slow they play. But, you would have guys just mispriced if Jason Tatum is out. So far this year, Brown's played 128 minutes without Tatum on the floor, 36% usage rate, 1.27 DraftKings points per minute. You would likely see at least increased opportunities for guys like Marcus Smart, Al Horford. But Jaylen Brown, I think, would be the very clear primary beneficiary.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. Any value plays do you think would move into the starting lineup and become really valuable?
I assume you would get Derek White starting. He's 5K and still probably not that interesting. Like
Yeah, I think
my assumption is they would go Smart, White, Brown, Williams, Horford.
Derek White is still a little priced up for when Brogdon was out. It's something
Right.
that hasn't quite come down yet. So yeah, it does look like that would be largely irrelevant who moving into the starting lineup. Anything else from this game that you want to bring up?
No.
Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, and if you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, you should do it by using the link that we have below, and it's going to get thrown into the YouTube chat as well. Because when you use that link, you get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit, and they are running a pretty good promo for Thanksgiving. So, Adam, I haven't looked very much at the Thanksgiving slate yet, but I am looking at Prize Picks. They have an over-under on Justin Jefferson for tomorrow, 0.5 receiving yards. What would you say your confidence level is that Jefferson is going to have over half a receiving yard?
Seems likely.
Seems very likely. Basically, free money that you guys should be taking advantage of on a couple of different accounts because you sign up using the link up to $100 bonus on your first deposit, but also something that's going to for sure win with Justin Jefferson. So take advantage of that. And also, when you sign up using our link, you get 1 free month of a Stokastic Plus Platinum package. So lots of good value to be taken advantage of when you sign up over at Prize Picks. Now, moving on to the next game, we have your Washington Wizards against the Miami Heat. The Heat are very banged up, but so are the Wizards right now. Monty Morris is questionable. Bradley Beal is questionable. Rui Hachimura is questionable. It's kind of hard to talk about them when there's this many key players that are questionable. But what to you could potentially or who could potentially benefit the most if the injuries break correctly with Morris, Beal, and Hachimura all questionable?
This team's a mess. Porzingis. I mean, if Beal's out, like Porzingis looks great. You get more usage for him. He's just going to look better. Kyle Kuzma is going to look better. Those are the two that I think you can safely point to. If Monte Morris is out, you have a $3,900 Jordan Goodwin that should play a bunch of minutes, and he's been productive so far this year. who knows if that continues because I have no idea who the hell the guy is. But he's been productive so far in his time with the Wizards. He is firmly in the rotation ahead of their first round pick from this year, which clearly was a great pick. But 0.95 DraftKings points per minute for Goodwin. If you get Morris out, especially if you get Morris and Beal out, Goodwin's going to look like a good value option. You're opening more minutes for guys like Avdia and Kispert. Those are both guys that can play multiple positions. So really, regardless of who's out, you're just likely to see more playing time there. Will Barton maybe plays a bigger role, but we really haven't seen that be the case this year. Even when Bradley Beal was out, you got more playing time for Barton, but he never stepped in as like that 30-minute sixth man off the bench that I expected to be the case. He's just played really poorly this year. They haven't really gone to him all that much. He's only averaging 0.78 DraftKings points per minute. So if Morris is out, I guess to sum it up, like if Morris is out, it should be more minutes for Goodwin. If Beal's out, it should be a lot more production for Kristaps Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma. If Rui's out, maybe you're getting a couple more minutes for Kuzma. You're also probably just getting more run for like Corey Kispert.
I don't even know how we're supposed to talk about the other side of this game. The Heat's injury report are the dumbest things ever. The Heat are just, I think they're using a random number generator and just being like, oh, this guy's questionable, this guy's probable, this guy's out, because the Wizards, it's kind of hard to know which players would prioritize. But for the Heat, Duncan Robinson is out, Jimmy Butler's out, and then we've got Tyler Hero, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Dwayne Dedmon, all questionable. Do you have any takes here to just watch our content later in the day and see what happens? Because I don't know what to say.
Yeah, watch the content later in the day. I mean, the one thing we know that's really important is that Jimmy Butler is out, so Bam Adebayo's production is going to look better, especially if Tyler Hero is also out. Kyle Lowry's production will look better, especially if Hero is also out. But beyond that, it just comes down to like, is Miami going to have 8 guys again? In which case you just play all of them. Are they going to have 7 guys? You play all of them. If they have 10, then you have to actually kind of think about which ones you want to play. And it's going to depend on which ones are in or out. But the one thing that we can say for sure is that Bam Adebayo is going to look better because Jimmy Butler is out, as is Kyle Lowry. Tyler Hero, we know if he's out, makes those two look even better. Beyond that, it just ends up being like how many guys are out because they could be extremely shorthanded again.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen them run a 7-man rotation as recently a week ago. So we'll see what happens later in the day. It is so hard to know what the Heat's injury report is going to look like in advance these days. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the deep dive live before lock later in the day that Adam and I are going to be doing, and we should have updates then. Now, moving on to the next game, we have the Nets against the Toronto Raptors. Now, from the Nets, I was really excited yesterday. I saw Ben Simmons was starting and that Claxton was going to be coming off the bench because I thought this is finally we're seeing the situation for Ben Simmons to succeed as the starting center. And then what happens? About 40 minutes before the game starts, we find out, no. It's still going to be Simmons and Claxton alongside in the front court. And the Nets struggled. I think there's opportunity for this team to really have an interesting lineup with Simmons as a starting center, but it looks like that's just not the way they're going right now. And the offense is just kind of a mess when it's Simmons and Claxton out there. Now, individually, Simmons is finally starting to look way better than he looked early in the season. Are you still liking to get to Ben Simmons? He was popular yesterday and looks like he will be popular again today.
Yeah, I mean, I was underweight on him yesterday just because he was getting so much ownership and, it was a 4-game slate. There weren't that many ways to differentiate. Here, again, he's getting 27% ownership, but his salary also dropped $200 from yesterday. So yeah, I think he's a really good play. Whether or not I get there will sort of depend on a lot of other factors with the rest of my lineup. But individually, I think Simmons very, very clearly a good option. He's playing a lot of minutes for Brooklyn. He's playing really well. They've talked on broadcasts and he's talked about how, he kind of just needed to get back in rhythm and just get used to playing basketball again. He pretty clearly has. Played 32 and a half minutes yesterday, lost about 3 minutes to garbage time at the end. I think projecting him for around 33 minutes makes sense, but there's certainly a chance he gets to 34, 35. He's, a fantasy point plus guy going forward, I would expect. So I think he very, very clearly looks like a good option.
And then as far as Durant and Irving go as pay-up options, I just have not played very much of these guys as of late. Well, Kyrie, because he hasn't been an option, but Durant's been priced up versus where he was earlier in the season. The price is still a little high from the time that Kyrie Irving was out. So with that in mind, I find that Kevin Durant probably the least appealing pay-up option on the slate.
Agreed. You're just getting, it's still Kevin Durant. Obviously, he can go nuts, but you're paying full price for it. Kyrie's back. So you're talking about around a 32% usage rate for Durant, about 1.3 DraftKings points per minute in the games he's played with Kyrie. It just makes it really difficult for me to get there.
And on the other side with the Toronto Raptors, Scotty Barnes is questionable, and we've already got Pascal Siakam out. He's been out for a while because he slipped on a wet spot. I'm pretty sure the game was in Dallas where Floor was just wet, slips on a wet spot, pulls his groin muscle. So he's been out. Now we've got Scotty Barnes questionable. What happens to the usage on Toronto if Scotty Barnes is out in addition to Siakam?
Should see more for Van Vliet and for Anunoby. Barnes really hasn't been that high of a usage guy, even with Siakam out, which has been kind of surprising. He's a low 20s guy, so you should just see more probably going to Van Vliet. Anunoby should take on a bigger role. The starting lineup will be messy. So Gary Trent should be back. He missed their last game, so I assume you would get the same starting lineup as last game, just with Trent in place of Barnes. And then if Trent is back, I assume you're getting Trent in place of Hernan Gomez from last game.
Yeah, we've also got Chris Boucher. He was out last game. He's off the injury report. And Delano Banton, he's questionable. He's dealing with an illness. So certainly some moving parts here. But if Scotty Barnes is out, I would think that should benefit Fred Van Vliet, who has seen a big uptick in usage since the injury to Pascal Siakam. Because early in the year, Van Vliet wasn't really doing much, at least relative to expectations from previous years and coming into the year. He's taken on a much bigger role. That gets solidified even more so if Scotty Barnes is ruled out today. Any value?
1.1 DraftKings points per minute and 37 minutes per game in the 6 games that Van Vliet's played without Siakam.
And then any value plays here that could stand out to you if Barnes is out?
I don't hate taking shots on guys like Gary Trent Jr. Obviously the playing time's been a little bit more inconsistent this year than in the past. He's a scoring dependent player, but he is still pretty cheap. I already mentioned I like Anunoby, especially if Barnes is out. The prices have adjusted a little bit, but if Hernan Gomez is starting at 3,600, I don't mind that. If we assume a similar, so you would have Boucher back now. But if Hernan Gomez starts at 3,600, it's not the worst punt play, but he's probably playing like 24 to 26 minutes.
All right, few games left to hit on. The next one, the Chicago Bulls against the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, the Bulls, another team where one of these teams where they've got a lot of offensive firepower, at least on paper they should. DeRozan, Vooch, Levine, but they've been one of the worst teams in the NBA in terms of adjusted offensive efficiency. So we've started to see prices decline a little bit. Vooch is now down to $7,400 on DK, Levine down to $7,100. I haven't played these guys all that much as of late. I'm not getting to them very much in my initial builds either. But should I be adjusting that because the salaries have come down so much on these guys?
They're kind of similar to Minnesota, I think, except they're in a tough spot against Milwaukee. But it's another team where when they're healthy, it's really difficult to point to which guy is going to do well. But the salaries have adjusted. 7,400 for Vooch, 71 for Levine, 8K for DeRozan. Those are all lower than we've gotten for a lot of the season. You're getting around 34 minutes per game from Levine. Vooch actually played 35 last time out. Typically, he's averaging around 32 with the rest going to Drummond. You can expect around 35 from DeRozan. I think they're all just sort of low priority, but high upside tournament options. And then I'll throw Andre Drummond in there as well. Just the caveat, every time he's 3,900, like the guy's a point per minute monster. He's going to be a great play anytime Vooch gets in foul trouble or the second unit gets extra minutes for one reason or another. So, obviously any given game, it's not likely, but I firmly believe if you just played an unknown Andre Drummond at 3,900 every slate, you probably come out ahead over the course of a season.
Yeah, particularly some of those days where, hey, Vooch gets into early foul trouble or there's blowout run. Drummond could put up a lot of fantasy points in a hurry, so I could certainly see the logic in that. Now, on the other side of the game with Milwaukee, I'm hardly getting to anything from here. Giannis and Drew Holiday both individually obviously have upside, but Holiday's gotten to be really expensive. And Giannis is in the same boat as Luka with what we talked about before, where it's just he's expensive on both FanDuel and DraftKings. And there's a lot of players with not quite the same upside as Giannis, but comparable-ish. And they're $2,000-$3,000 less expensive. He's hard to fit into lineups these days.
Yeah, exactly. It's very similar to what we were talking about with Luka. Like, he's a great point per minute guy, but you're just sacrificing so much elsewhere.
And then Drew Holiday, it's not exactly the same conversation other than just he's gotten to be really expensive now. And I just don't think there's a lot of upside, at least relative to a projection for Drew Holiday. So I hardly get to anything from Milwaukee. And the Bulls defense has actually been shockingly decent this year, whereas their offense has kind of sucked. But is there anything that really does stand out to you from Milwaukee that I'm missing?
No, I think they're one of the least appealing teams on the slate. I think Giannis probably a little bit easier to get to on FanDuel. I know that's been the case a lot recently, but clearly if you can get to Giannis, great. But outside of that, I don't really see anything.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. That was an easy game to just kind of blow through. But New Orleans Pelicans against the San Antonio Spurs. The New Orleans side of the game is also going to be kind of similar to some of these other spots we talked about with all these guys healthy. CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Jonas Valanciunas splitting center minutes with Larry Nance. This is another team where it's hard to reliably say any one player is a standout option. Do you see it differently?
No, I think that it's another one of those teams. Like I always use them, Minnesota and Chicago as like the three examples where everybody's good. They all have high ceilings, but they also are going to cut into each other a lot on average. And it's just going to make it really difficult to pinpoint which one you want to go to. So I think any of McCollum, Williamson, Ingram are good tournament plays in the sense where, if you're building your lineup around, a popular Ben Simmons, a popular, I'll say Paul Reed just for the sake of this example, even though we already talked about that. You have Paul Reed, you have Ben Simmons, you have Milton and Melton. Like by all means, throw in one of these Pelicans guys. Hope that you catch the right one and that you get the big game. But they're just not guys that are going to be in a high percentage of my lineups because they're relatively unlikely to succeed.
Yeah, and if I had to pick one guy, it would be Zion from this team for me, but I don't even know that I'm going to end up really getting to him. The lineups I got to 2% of them in the lineups I ran this morning. That was the most of any of these guys, and it still wasn't all that significant. And then as for the cheap guys, Najee Marshall is picking up 7% ownership, so there are some people rostering him, but anything from a value standpoint that's worth mentioning here?
I don't really think so. I mean, we're getting that center split between Joval and Nance, but Nance is up to 4,700 now. Joval is getting to a point where I'm going to start going there in tournaments. I don't know if it'll be today, but just hoping for that 2 fantasy point per minute game in 24, 25 minutes. But that's one to keep an eye on. Again, probably not the slate for it, but he is getting really cheap.
And on the Spurs side of the game, there is potential for value here because Jakob Poeltl is questionable. Josh Richardson is already not officially out, but he's doubtful. Seems pretty unlikely that he's going to play. Now, for the Spurs, it just seems like this team never fields their entire starting lineup anymore. It's always one or two guys that's missing. Hurdle's absence, I think, potentially opens up the most value because there are guys coming off the bench that have upside, like Charles Bassey at the center spot. We've seen him put up some big games in some when he's gotten extended minutes. Gorgie Jeng started last game. One thing that's really weird is the last game with Pirtle out, Bassey actually played less than he'd been playing lately. What do you make of that?
So that had happened in a couple of games, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. We've seen Gorgie Jang sort of in the rotation, but Zach Collins is probably here too, so that should cut into Bassey. My big question is, have you seen what Zach Collins is on the injury report with?
So Zach Collins on the injury report, it is, first of all, I thought a fibula was in your head. A left
Fibula's in your leg.
So left fibula non-displaced head fracture.
So I'm extremely confused.
So I assume that means kneecap, right?
It has to be referring to something that isn't actually a non-displaced head fracture because that sounds really bad.
So, but I'm assuming that the fibula head, I would assume that means kneecap. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. But I did it because I have so many jokes I want to make right now.
All right. Yeah, not to make stereotypes, but Jordan would know if any of us we're gonna figure that out amongst the group. By the way, Jordan, you shouldn't have pretended you were reading that. You should have just been like, "Hey, I know this information."
Yeah, but yeah, no. So well, because it's weird too on the injury report. There's like a semicolon or colon, whatever the one with like the dot and the comma is. So it makes it look like it's 2 injuries. Like, oh, he broke his leg and he also fractured his head.
Yeah, his head's broken, his leg doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, he was listed as probable, so I didn't even think to look at what the injury was. But yeah, that's it seems not ideal. A left fibula non-displaced head fracture. But anyway, if Jakob Poeltl's out, if Gorgie Jeng starts again, would he be an interesting value option for you?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess the idea would be that maybe he starts and they just have Collins play some backup minutes to get back in shape or whatever. But yeah, I mean, he's not a bad point per minute guy. Centers typically never are. He's $3,500. So if he starts, sure. I think it's pretty unlikely between the combination of Collins being probable and Poeltl being questionable. But yeah.
Yeah, it was. It's hard to know what to make of the minutes from last game. Jeng started. He played 21 minutes. The game was also decided by 30 points. It was massively one-sided. So we'll see what ends up happening with the Spurs, their injury report, because That's definitely kind of a weird situation. The next one, the Denver Nuggets taking on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Denver had arguably the worst loss of the entire season last night. They were taking on the Detroit Pistons, who are terrible. They had Jokic back. They had Murray back. The Pistons were shorthanded. They're missing Sadiq Bey. They're missing Cade Cunningham. Denver somehow lost that game at home. Now, for today, we have Bones Highland questionable. I'm assuming that Jamal Murray does not play. Tail end of a back-to-back, him coming off the torn ACL. Are you on the same page as me where you think that at the very least there's a realistic chance that Murray doesn't play?
Definitely a chance. I wanted to go back and see if he's played in them previously, and he has not. I don't know how many he skipped, but he hasn't played one this year, so seems relatively likely.
Yeah, so far they have had just one back to back, that's also something that makes this a little tricky is this team's only had one back to back and it was the second and third game of the year that he sat. So you would assume that for Jamal Murray coming back from the torn ACL, game 2 and game 3 of the season could be different looking
Right.
than game, 17 or game 18. I think he's probably more likely to sit than play just because they've been cautious bringing him back. He played 34 minutes last night, which was close to a season high for him. But we also have Bones Highland questionable. Ish Smith is questionable. If a lot of these guys are out, there could be a big void to fill in the backcourt for Denver. So just playing a scenario where there is no Murray, Highland, or Ish Smith, what would happen?
Bruce Brown. He's been the guy that just basically fills in for anybody when they're out, and we've seen him, fill in for Murray previously. If Murray's out and Highland's out, you should just be getting a ton of playing time from Brown. He's a good enough point per minute guy. Also, obviously, you would expect Jokic's rates to go up if Murray's out. He's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. Usage rate's going to go up, all of that. Jokic is already up to 11.6, so it's going to be relatively tough to get to him anyway. But Bruce Brown sitting at 6,300, probably a little bit easier to get to, especially with point guard and small forward eligibility on DraftKings. You still have a reasonably priced Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. as well.
Yeah, and then Jokic only center eligible and just not quite the same issue as Jokic and Luka in terms of he isn't quite the same price point, but there's position limitations to him. And then also he just hasn't been quite as good this year as he was in previous years, which we should expect from a fantasy standpoint. He didn't have Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr. there this year. Those guys are both there. It's going to cut into him a little bit. One guy that's really struggled as of late, MPJ, Michael Porter Jr., he was terrible in the games that Jokic and Murray were out. And I don't even know because I played him a lot in those games. Maybe he just needs these guys to be on the court to help create easier shots for him. But the price point has come down for Michael Porter Jr. Do you have any interest in him or any of the other Nuggets players?
Secondary options, I think, certainly looking better if Murray's out. And, again, if Highland's out, because, like Highland's someone that even if Murray's out, I expect Highland to come off the bench, but he's such a high usage guy when he's out there that he's going to cut into guys like Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. Whereas if Highland and Murray are both out, it makes them look a bit better as well.
Let's talk about Oklahoma City, where it's just basically been the SGA show. The expectation coming into the year was that this team was going to tank. And SGA is like, no, I am so good at basketball that I'm just going to single-handedly win games. SGA, even when it seems like he is not going to be playing well, like last game, for instance, I think he had something like 6 fantasy points in the first quarter, got off to a really slow start, still finishes with his normal right around 50 fantasy points. His usage is insane every game. 36% last game. Before that, 26%, 40%. 36, 37%. I never have an issue getting to SGA. And because of players like SGA, that's why I haven't been playing as much of Luka, Giannis, those types of guys as of late, because I could get SGA for $2,000, $2,500 less expensive. And he's just been outstanding this year.
Yeah, agreed. And, the price tag is getting up there, but it's deserved. He's $10,200. He's averaging 35, 36 minutes per game. He's, knock on wood, the only guy on this team that they don't jerk his minutes around. I assume it's some sort of understanding where it's just like, look, I'll put up with this tanking bullshit as long as you let me go out there and, do my thing. So, yeah, like, maybe it'll happen eventually, but we've gotten those occasional games where it's like, oh, Josh Giddey's not starting the second half, or Lou Dort just randomly doesn't play a ton of minutes, but they've left SGA alone, which has been nice as well. Not the fastest paced game here, but you still have nearly a 230 total, so that's nice. I think SGA looks really good, and I have no idea why he's only getting 3% ownership.
And also, Josh Giddey's minutes, 34 minutes, 37 minutes in the last couple of games. He had that one weird game against Washington where he didn't start the second half and only played 20 minutes. So we have seen it. It's like once a week, Giddey randomly plays 20 or 22 minutes for no reason at all. And then in the other games, he plays like 34 to 37 minutes. Giddey is one of the more popular plays on DK today, right around 20% ownership. at a 7,000 price tag. Over on FanDuel, Giddy is 6,800 and is projected for 26% ownership. I know the minutes haven't been the most reliable thing in the world for Josh Giddy, but how do you feel about him as a chalk play today?
I think he looks good. I am a little scared of that ownership, but one reason it does make sense to me is that we've talked about a lot of guards that we like today. We've talked about a lot of plays that we like, and they've mostly been more expensive than Giddy. So I do think that Giddy's just probably going to fit really nicely into some lineups alongside some of those other guard options that we've really liked. And like you said, his playing time has been trending up. You know the risks that you're taking with OKC. There's a non-zero chance that they do something stupid that pisses you off at halftime. But chances are you're going to get 33, 34 minutes from Giddy. He's around a fantasy point per minute guy, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute overall this year. So I agree that he's a good play. He should be getting ownership.
Got a super chat from Avi Schreier. One team on FanDuel last night was trading Korkmaz and Craig for Knox Herter. For first place, 3K. Thanks for the help last night. Couldn't do it without y'all. Nice hit last night, Avi.
Congrats.
Happy to help. And yeah, last night was, by the way, I can't take any credit for you playing Kevin Knox last night.
Yeah, I'll say Korkmaz and Knox, I would have never touched either one, so I'm not taking any credit for that.
Yeah, so that good hit by you, but I think that's more on you. I can't take any credit for that. Getting back to the game we were just talking about, OKC. Any other players here that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I hate this team.
All right. So if you guys do not have a BetMGM account, here's why you should. They've got a special going on right now for the World Cup where if you make a deposit, click on the link that we have below in the description box. It's going to get thrown into the YouTube chat. You click on that link, you sign up at BetMGM, and you place a $10 money line bet on any soccer game. It's going to pay out $200. It is as easy as that. So the language on the site is a little confusing. It says as long as a goal is scored, but it means as long as a goal is scored at any point in the World Cup, which it's already happened. So the bet just wins automatically. $10 into $200. It is a no-brainer. Take advantage of the offer. So if you don't have a BetMGM account, or if you're in a state that just opened up sports betting, like Adam, for instance, lives in Maryland. Maryland just went live with sports betting this week. So if you're in Maryland, you don't have any sports betting accounts, check out FanDuel, DraftKings, but of course, BetMGM and take advantage of this offer. It's $200 you're getting at no risk to yourself.
Also, if you do live in Maryland, I was doing this as Greg talked. Alex just tweeted out a link with like all of the Maryland sports betting promos. So,
oh, that's also very useful. So I'll retweet that after we're done here. But that's actually something you guys should really be taking advantage of. And not even saying this from like a sales standpoint or anything, but when you're in a place where sports betting opens up, you just have books that are trying to acquire customers that give out a ton of free money. It's pretty easy to take advantage of. So check out that tweet that Alex had. I'll go look at it here. Actually, Jordan, can you pull that up on the screen just so people could see what it is? And it's basically just going to be a list of all of the sports books that you guys could sign up for and all the different offers to take advantage
of. Steven Leibowitz, it took a little over 2 years.
What was for it to get
yeah, we passed it in like midterms 2020 or whatever. And yeah, just now got it running.
All right, couple games left to hit on. The next one, the Detroit Pistons against the Utah Jazz. This Detroit team, the rotations are very difficult to figure out at this point because they had Corey Joseph back in the mix. He's fat. He was playing minutes last night. But then also, it's like Hamidou Diallo is playing extended minutes at one point. Isaiah Livers started last night. What do you make of the role players on the team? It seems like Alec Burks is playing bigger minutes now, but I don't even know if that's reliable.
Right. I mean, we've seen it. You know, he played 20 and a half minutes yesterday. He had played a little bit more than that the game before. I'm not comfortable going much higher than that. I'll probably go to like 22 minutes. We've seen Livers starting. He played 16 minutes and then 24 minutes. Kevin Knox has played 22 and then 24. I don't know what to make of that either because Kevin Knox sucks. It just seems like a matter of time before he's not getting minutes, but who knows? I guess at this point, you kind of have to assume he's getting around 20. So I don't really want to mess with those guys too much, but there is potential value, I guess, just because the minutes have been there. I do think the front court's interesting. Marvin Bagley and Jalen Duren continue to split minutes at center. Duren's been on the winning end of that the last few games, in part because Bagley was in foul trouble a couple of games ago. But then even yesterday, no foul trouble for Bagley, just Jalen Duren playing the last like 15 minutes of the game. So I do think that's an interesting spot to pay attention to because you're getting 48 minutes there. Jalen Duren's 4,300, Marvin Bagley's 4,800. To me, this is like kind of the exact same spot as Philadelphia, except for with a lot less attention.
Yeah, it's so hard to predict some of the rotations, and kind of on the Utah side as well, where we've got some weird scenarios off the bench. It's hard. I don't know what to make of their bench either because there's no Mike Conley and Taylor Norton Tucker, Malik Beasley. I assume Colin Sexton's going to start again, but like we saw last game, that doesn't mean Sexton is just guaranteed to play big minutes. Is there any one guy that you think benefits above everybody else with Mike Conley out? Because, like I said, Sexton started last game, but played 28 minutes and didn't really do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's Sexton. Like, just being able to more or less lock in 28 minutes and know that there's the potential for more if he's playing well. He didn't close that game, so easily could have gotten the 30-32. They closed with Beasley and Horton Tucker. Horton Tucker still only played 20 minutes. So I still really like Sexton at 4,400. Beasley, we've seen pretty consistently closing recently and playing well. He's 4,800, so he looks pretty nice. And then the regulars here, Markkanen, Clarkson, Olynyk, they're all Vanderbilt. They're all favorably priced as well.
One final game on the slate, and this one, it's going to be a big one from a value standpoint for the Clippers. I don't know what the deal is with Kawhi Leonard, but it's kind of getting upsetting that it looks like there's a chance we're just never going to see him play at the same level again because the knee has been an issue all year. Now he's got an ankle injury. He's out. Paul George is out. It looks like Paul George is going to be out for a couple of weeks or so. But this does open up a lot of opportunity. John Wall, could he play extended minutes? What's standing out from the Clippers with their two best players out?
Yeah, ton of opportunity here. So if you just look before even like thinking about rotations, just look at what guys have done without George or Kawhi on the floor this year. Norman Powell's played the most minutes, 191 minutes, 30.6% usage rate, just north of a fantasy point per minute. John Wall's played 121 minutes, 1.2 DraftKings points per minute with a 32% usage rate. Reggie Jackson's been absolute garbage, 0.75 DraftKings points per minute, 20% usage rate, does have a 29.5% assist percentage, 40.6% true shooting percentage. So as bad as Reggie Jackson is, that production is going to come up a bit. There are, certainly increased opportunities for him. Terrence Mann's at 0.83 DraftKings points per minute. Zubats is just north of a fantasy point per minute. So there's a lot of production to go around here. Last game, you had George out, you had Kawhi in. Kawhi played 23 minutes. Terrence Mann got the start there. I'm curious to see what they'll do here. Like, they could go Batum in place of Leonard. They could go Powell. We also could see them go Wall. A few games ago, they started the second half with Wall and Jackson together. I don't remember who got hurt mid-game, but they did that. So I don't expect them to do it here, but certainly something to keep an eye on. One way or the other, there's going to be guys that look really, really good for the Clippers.
And on the other side for the Warriors, we saw a bunch of guys that were out the other day. They're all going to be back. Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Steph Curry. We should expect all of them to play. Curry's made way more sense as a pay-up option this year to me than in previous years. He's playing more minutes. He's also contributing a lot more in the peripheral stats. So I'm going to be paying up for Steph Curry a little bit, but I don't really think anything else am I going to be getting to from the Warriors.
Yeah, I like getting to Steph where I can. You still run into that same issue where there's a lot of really good guards that are less expensive, but at least they're, he's closer in price to them than Luka is. Outside of that, I mean, it's just tough to like much of anything here on the slate.
All right, that is going to do it for us, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you're not done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the other content we have today. Lofty's about to break down the NFL slate on the strategy show, but then also deep dive later in the day, live before lock. Check out all that. Lots of players on the injury report, a lot of moving pieces. Catch you guys later.